The flight attendant's voice cracked over the intercom, trembling in a way that made every passenger freeze mid-breath. "Ladies and gentlemen, we have to land immediately." A hush swept through the cabin, the kind of silence where even the hum of the engines felt too loud. I gripped the armrest, my heart pounding, not from the sudden announcement, but from what had happened just minutes before. I had barely settled into my first-class seat, adjusting my bag under the seat. In front of me, when a woman 2 rows up twisted around with a glare sharp enough to cut steel. "Excuse me," she said, her tone dripping with disbelief. "Can you prove you belong here?" For a moment, I thought I'd misheard her, but her narrowed eyes told me I hadn't. The air in that cabin felt heavier, the stares of other passengers pressing in on me. I'd been judged before, but never so publicly, never so boldly. Now, as the captain's voice joined the flight attendants to confirm an emergency landing, I couldn't help but wonder, was this all just coincidence, or had her accusation set something in motion that none of us saw coming? "My name's Marcus Williams, 42 years old, father of 2, and a man who's spent more time working than sleeping these past few years. I run a small tech repair business in Atlanta, and between managing orders, fixing laptops, and keeping the lights on, vacations aren't exactly something I get often. This trip was different. My daughter, Aaliyah, was graduating from college in Seattle, and I wasn't about to miss the chance to see her walk across that stage. My wife insisted I fly first class, her way of saying, "You've earned this," even though splurging on myself never came easy. So there I was, boarding with a steaming cup of airport coffee in one hand and my carry-on in the other, stepping into the quiet hum of first class. The seats were wide, the leather smelled rich, and a soft, almost buttery light filled the cabin. Business travelers typed on laptops. A couple murmured softly over champagne, and for the first time in months, I felt my shoulders relax. I slid into my seat, tucked my bag neatly, and took a deep breath, letting the rare comfort sink in. That's when I felt it. A presence. A woman 2 rows up turned slowly, her sharp blue eyes locking on me like a spotlight. Her lips tightened before she leaned back toward me. "Excuse me," she said, tilting her head as if studying an unusual specimen. "Are you sure you're in the right section?" Her voice was sugar-coated, but the implication burned. I froze for a heartbeat, coffee cooling in my hand, the weight of nearby eyes already settling on me. It wasn't curiosity in her gaze. It was certainty, as if she had already decided the answer. I blinked, forcing a polite smile as I replied, "Yes, I'm in the right seat." I held up my boarding pass halfway, thinking that would end it, but she didn't even glance at it. Instead, she leaned back farther in her seat, voice rising just enough for nearby passengers to hear. "I just think, sometimes mistakes happen. Maybe you wandered in by accident. Coach is behind us." The word coach came out like it had a bad taste. A man across the aisle shifted uncomfortably, pretending to scroll on his phone, but clearly listening. I took a slow breath, steadying my tone. "No mistake. I paid for this seat." Her eyebrows shot up in mock surprise. "Oh? Well, that's unusual." The pause after her words carried the unspoken for someone like you. My jaw tightened. "Unusual how?" I asked. She gave a little laugh, the kind that says you know exactly what I mean. Before I could speak again, she pressed the call button above her head. Within seconds, a flight attendant appeared, smiling professionally. "Can I help you, ma'am?" Karen didn't hesitate. "Yes, I'm concerned there's been a seating error. This gentleman," she gestured at me with her chin like I was a suspicious package, "might be in the wrong section." The attendant turned to me, the smile faltering ever so slightly. "Sir, could I just see your ticket, please?" The words were calm, but I could feel the ripple in the cabin. Heads lifted, someone whispered. My throat felt dry as I slowly reached for my phone, pulling up the digital boarding pass. I held it out, my fingers steadier than I expected, and she scanned it quickly. "You're in the right seat, sir," the attendant said, turning back. To Karen. "Is there anything else?" Karen's lips pressed into a thin line. "Well, I just wanted to be sure," she murmured. But her eyes told a different story. They said she still didn't believe it. The attendant walked away, but the damage was done. Every glance from the surrounding rows felt like a silent question. And for the rest of the boarding, I could feel her gaze burning into the side of my face like she was waiting for me to slip up. The flight attendant's reassurance should have been the end of it, but Karen wasn't done. She leaned toward the man beside her, whispering just loudly enough for the surrounding rows to hear, "You'd think they'd check IDs for first class, not just tickets." My ears burned, every muscle in my shoulders tightening. I told myself to let it go. Aaliyah's graduation was in 2 days, and the last thing I needed was trouble before I even got there. Still, her words clung to me like smoke. I stared out the window, willing myself to focus on the clouds drifting in. The afternoon sun, when I noticed movement. 3 rows back, a young woman discreetly lifting her phone, angling it toward us. A man across the aisle did the same. Their eyes met briefly, a silent acknowledgement. This is worth recording. Karen caught sight of them and straightened, smoothing her blouse as though she were the victim here. "I'm just trying to keep things secure," she announced to no one in particular, her voice dripping with false righteousness. The flight attendant reappeared, kneeling beside me this time. "Sir, I apologize for the inconvenience," she said softly. "But we've had a complaint. Do you mind showing me your ID just to be thorough?" For a moment, I froze. I thought about the countless times I'd been asked to prove. I belonged somewhere, at stores, in neighborhoods, at my own kids' school events. I thought about the quiet humiliation that came with each request, the way strangers' eyes seemed to weigh your worth. My jaw clenched as I pulled my wallet from my pocket and handed over my ID without a word. She glanced at it, nodded, and handed it back quickly. "Everything's perfectly fine," she said firmly this time, casting Karen a look that carried the weight of finality. But Karen just sniffed, muttering something under her breath. I took another breath, long and slow, telling myself the worst was over, until the cabin lights flickered. A faint chemical smell drifted in from somewhere. Up front, sharp enough to make my nose twitch, the hum of the engine seemed to change pitch, lower, almost uneasy. Then the captain's voice crackled through the speakers, calm but urgent. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're experiencing a mechanical issue and will be making an emergency landing at the nearest airport. Please remain seated with your seatbelts fastened." The cabin erupted into a low buzz of voices, nervous questions, and hurried movements. The flight attendants moved quickly down the aisle, checking buckles and instructing passengers on brace positions. Karen's self-assured posture melted into stiff, wide-eyed silence. For the first time since boarding, all eyes weren't on me. They were on the possibility that something far bigger than her petty suspicion was about to happen. The weight in the air had shifted, and deep down, I knew this flight wasn't going to end the way any of us expected. The cabin was tense, every passenger gripping the armrests or the person beside them as the plane began its gradual descent. The sharp smell from the front lingered, and the hum of the engine sounded uneven, like a heartbeat skipping. A flight. Attendant stumbled slightly as we hit a pocket of turbulence, and without thinking, I reached out to steady her. She gave me a grateful nod before hurrying on, but moments later, another attendant leaned over the aisle to speak urgently. An elderly woman in the row ahead was struggling to breathe, her oxygen mask tangled and her hands shaking. Instinct overrode everything. I unbuckled, stepped into the narrow space, and gently freed the mask from the straps. "Deep breaths, ma'am. You're okay," I said, securing it over her mouth and nose. Her chest began to rise more steadily within seconds. The attendant returned with a portable oxygen tank, and together we made sure she was stable. I could feel eyes on me again, but this time it wasn't suspicion. It was recognition. Even Karen was watching, her face pale and tight, lips pressed, together without a single word. The captain's voice came back on, steady now, announcing that we'd be landing safely within minutes. As the wheels touched down and the cabin erupted in relieved applause, the lead flight attendant stopped at my seat. "Mr. Williams," she said loudly enough for several rows to hear, "thank you for your assistance today. You kept a situation from becoming much worse." She smiled warmly, and I caught a few passengers nodding in quiet agreement. Karen shifted uncomfortably, avoiding my eyes completely. Her earlier confidence had dissolved into something closer to shame, and I didn't need an apology to know she regretted every word. As we taxied to the gate, the attendant added, "The airline would like to offer you complimentary upgrades for your next flights, in appreciation." I simply nodded, feeling a strange mix of pride and exhaustion. It wasn't about the upgrade. It was about the fact that when the moment came, my actions had spoken louder than her assumptions ever could. As the passengers filed out of the yacht plane, I stayed seated for a moment, letting the crowd thin. My hands rested on my knees, steady now, though the memory of that first confrontation still lingered like a faint bruise. I thought about how quickly a simple flight had turned into a test, not of my ticket, not of my ID, but of my patience and my dignity. The truth is, it's exhausting, carrying the unspoken expectation that you have to prove yourself before you're even given the benefit of the doubt. I could have let anger guide me. I could have matched her sharp words with sharper ones. But in the end, it was the small choices, staying calm, helping when it mattered, that rewrote the narrative in that cabin. As I finally stood and gathered my bag, I noticed Karen a few rows ahead, slipping into the terminal without so much as a glance back. I didn't need her acknowledgement. The real victory was knowing that every person who witnessed what happened had seen the truth for themselves. Sometimes the best way to silence a false judgment isn't to shout over it. It's to live in a way that makes it impossible to believe. That day, I didn't just prove I belonged in first class. I proved that no seat, no ticket, no title decides your worth. It's your actions in the moments that count that tell the real story. If you'd been in my seat that day, with someone questioning whether you belonged before you even had a chance to settle in, how would you have handled it? Would you have confronted her head-on, or stayed quiet and let your actions speak later? I'd love to hear your thoughts and stories in the comments, because I know I'm not the only one who's been put in that position. And if you think, this flight was unforgettable, wait until you hear what happened when my HOA neighbor tried to have my kids banned from our own backyard. That one gets wild.